Things are looking different in College Park, Maryland. For the first year since 2019, Taulia Tagovailoa will not be under center for the Terps. Oh, and they don't play Michigan or Ohio State and have the Big Ten East structure. Ahmed Ghafir from Inside the Black and Gold joins me to preview all things Maryland Terrapins 2024 football season.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
The realignment of the Big Ten Conference equals no Big Ten East, and I think Maryland's going to be okay with that. But they enter 2024 looking to make that next step as a program. To talk all things Maryland Terrapins, we welcome in Ahmed Ghafir from Inside the Black and Gold. It's always great to talk with you, and you do great work with that site over there. So when I first talk about the Maryland Terrapins, I look, of course, my eyes, and I think everybody looks towards that quarterback position, because Mike Locksley has been the head coach for 5 years, 4 of them. Taulia Tagovailoa has been the quarterback of this team. That first year in 2019, he did not have Taulia. He came over from Alabama in 2020. How do you anticipate the adjustment, right? They've been so used to old, reliable number 3 back there at quarterback. How do you anticipate the adjustment for Maryland in terms of the leader of this team at the quarterback position?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, appreciate you taking the time and bringing me on today. And, obviously, like you said, that quarterback room, Taulia has really, proved to be that program-changing quarterback. And now it's a little changing of the tide a little bit for Maryland. And obviously, they went into the transfer portal, brought in MJ Morris, transfer from NC State, who has experience starting over the last 2 seasons. So for right now, I think with him, he was able to get in through spring ball. And the biggest thing really from the time he's gotten on campus till now has really just been about mastering the offense, learning the concepts, knowing everything inside out, knowing the plays. So it's about being just a master of Locksley's offense. Now, Locksley himself, he's been transparent and open about the fact that whoever wins the quarterback battle is going to be the guy who also does a better job of taking care of the football. Now, not saying that MJ Morris can't do that, but I think Billy Edwards, where he has a little bit of familiarity, especially within Locksley's offense over his experience over the last 2 years, I think that's kind of where it looms largest right now. So, those 2 guys are battling it out, and Cam Edge is right in that room. Third year quarterback, former DeMatha, went over to Smyrna or Delaware before transitioning to Maryland. Got a chance to showcase what he's capable of in the bowl game. His first pass, deep ball down to Kaden Prather, set Maryland up for a touchdown 1 play later, which marked Cam Edge's first career touchdown pass. So definitely, I think right now that quarterback room still undecided. If I had to guess, my gut feel would probably be MJ Morris, who ends up being that starting quarterback, but not going to really be decided until at least that second scrimmage for Maryland during fall camp, and definitely won't be announced until week 1. But I kind of see, the longer that it goes for Maryland, the more time that MJ Morris gets, the more reps that he gets, the more comfortable he gets within the offense. And I think that's kind of, all eyes are on that right now. But again, like we saw with Billy Edwards last year, he's showcased that he's able to provide a different element, on the ground, wildcat, goal line formation. So I think he'll be able to find himself a role where MJ can also tap into that athleticism. Again, really hasn't been much questions about MJ Morris, whether, from an athletic standpoint, whether he's a fit. I think that those questions have kind of all been answered since his official visit, since his commitment came. But like you said, Taulia, you can't always replace experience, and having a guy for 4 years, that's always a tall task. So, I think that we'll kind of continue to see this battle play out into the fall, but we'll see how MJ Morris takes the reins and handles it.
The all-time leading passer in Big Ten history. Yeah, that's not going to be easy to replace. When I watched the spring game, I heard Mike Locksley say that, when MJ Morris is able to get more time, he's able to get more experience, I think he's going to be able to grasp things a little bit more. When you watch MJ, what is it about his skill set that really stands out that makes you believe that he's going to be the guy? Because when I look at him, I see Billy Edwards and his mobility. I see maybe Cam Edge and his throwing ability. And then I see MJ. It seems like those 2 skill sets really mesh together. What's kind of your viewpoint on why you think NC State transfer MJ Morris could be the guy when we start things off in September?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of he's kind of showcased it at times at NC State. And I think kind of just being more consistent, I think is kind of that next step for him at Maryland. But again, I think he's able to kind of show off that accuracy on his short and intermediate routes, has the capability to hit the long ball as well. But again, it goes back to kind of that dual threat ability, being able to, similar to Taulia, Taulia, I wouldn't say was the fastest guy, but he was able to, extend plays with his legs and, pick up the necessary yards at times if need be. I think MJ Morris kind of fits that as well to a T, maybe probably a little bit more athletic than Taulia slightly. So I think that's kind of really where he really, masters into that Locksley offense.
If I'm MJ Morris, assuming like we kind of agree that he could be the guy going forth at the quarterback position, but if I'm MJ Morris, I'm pretty confident in what I have around me. And it just seems like another reload at the wide receiver position. They've had some really good players, these last handful of seasons in College Park. And then you look at Ty Felton coming back. You look at Kaden Prather coming back, a couple of 600-yard guys. Octavian Smith Jr. Is in that room as well. You're coming off of losses to just Sean Jones, Corey Dyches. He could also be slotted as a tight end as well. But a pretty good pass catcher, no matter where they lined him up in the formation. Now, considering that maybe what you have at quarterback, do you still see some high level of production? Can you see a 1,000-yard receiver in this wide receiver room?
Yeah, I could potentially see that between, Kaden Prather and Ty Felton. I think with those guys, different types of receivers. I think Ty Felton is arguably one of the fastest, if not the fastest receiver in the Big Ten, probably in the country, with that top end speed. I believe he broke near 23 miles per hour during one of his runs last year. I think it was in the Nebraska game. Kaden Prather has that big body, deep threat just about every time he's on the field. So, I think those two guys, just kind of with their experience, definitely going to be the alpha dogs in the room, and that wide receiver room is definitely on and off the field led by them. So I think it's definitely a chance, but I think the 2024 season, like you mentioned, these last couple of years, guys like Dante Demas, Raheem Jarrett, Deshaun Jones, Jacob Copeland, guys that really came in and were established when they stepped into those starting roles. This is kind of that first year, obviously, Ty Felton and Kaden Prather, both of those guys are coming off really good seasons in 2023. But I think this year we'll start to see more Octavian Smith Jr., like you said, and Shalik Knotts is another guy to keep tabs on. Guy that they really, really wanted to see break out in the spring, was a consistent name as a guy that's been sticking out in practices. So I think he's another guy that really has a chance to make a name for himself in that wide receiver room. And then lastly, Braden Wisłowski. He's a slot guy, super fast, and he made his mark in special teams last year. Had the first kickoff return for a touchdown, I believe, since Stephon Diggs. So it's been a while since Maryland's kind of had that explosiveness. So again, I think being able to add a 1,000 receiver, I think that's going to be either Ty Felton or Kaden Prather, but definitely some intriguing names that maybe not have the experience behind them, but are definitely capable or in line to play bigger roles in 2024.
I believe Maryland, when you look back at the early Taulia Tagovailoa years, we'll call it 2020 and 2021, it leaned definitely something maybe like 65-35 pass or whatever percentage you want to put around it. It definitely leaned pass. It feels like as the years kind of went on, this became more of a balanced offense. And they can lean on a guy like Roman Hemby, who I think is maybe one of the more underrated running backs right now in the Big Ten. Do you view this offense becoming even more balanced and maybe even leaning run, considering maybe what you have from the inexperience at the quarterback position?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an emphasis to, just be more efficient on the ground. I mean, Maryland last year really struggled at times to establish much of a run game. Part of it's on the run game itself, and part of it's on the offensive line. That's a question mark in 2024, but was definitely something that Maryland has to work through in 2023. And Maryland brought in the second offensive line coach and Damian Wroblewski, excuse me, brought in the offensive analyst and Brian Ferentz, who obviously that Iowa offense didn't really jump out to many people last year, but his specialty is the run game, and I think that's kind of where he's coming in and trying to be an asset for Maryland. So I think Maryland has the capability of really establishing more balance on offense, and I think Roman Hemby, Colby McDonald, and definitely would not sleep on Nolan Ray. I expect him to be a big factor in that running back rotation. He was the guy really has that top end speed, really elusive, tough tackle. and he was a consistent top performer through the spring ball. Definitely expect him to be in the rotation, but I definitely expect Maryland to, whether they actually create a more balanced offense remains to be seen, but I expect Maryland to put much more of an emphasis on creating more of that balance.
Boy, when I watched Nolan Ray in that spring game, you can see the excitement of Maryland fans and why they kind of love this kid. It didn't work out for maybe someone like Ramon Brown that was in highly recruited, but getting a guy like Nolan Ray and Colby McDonald, we've seen what he can bring to the table. There's certainly a trio of running backs that can certainly do some things in College Park, Maryland. We briefly talked about the offensive line. Let's dive into it a little bit more. Alan Heron, Josh Kaltenberg, a couple of guys that are experienced guys that transfer into this offensive line. Is this the group? Is this the guys that a couple of guys that they need to be able to make this offensive line a little bit better and give them the boost? And how much of a boost would it be for this offensive line to become really good and kind of go match up pretty well against some of the best defensive lines in the Big Ten?
Yeah, absolutely. Offensive line was arguably as much of a need as the quarterback position was going into this offseason. Had to replace all 5 starters. Kyle Long is the guy that he returned, so he'll probably start at left guard. So he has that starting experience. I believe he started in 10 games last year. Don't hold me to that. That might be off the top, but he has a lot of starting experience. But like you said, Josh Kaltenberger, he comes in. He'll be that starting center very likely. And after Maryland really split their reps between Mike Purcell, Eric Harris in 2023, Kaltenberger really gets a chance to step in, stabilize the position, upgrade the position this fall. So I definitely expect him to be that asset. Leo Ba, who's a transfer from Georgia, really athletic, really carries his weight very well as well. And I'd expect him to be an asset at right guard. I think the big questions right now are kind of at tackle. Maryland, like you mentioned, Alan Huron, guy that they were able to flip from Penn State on signing day. I think right now is probably more of a right tackle. You ask around some people at Maryland, some people believe that he really has NFL potential. He has 2 years of eligibility left. I fully expect him to be here for 2 years going into the season. So I think how he's able to adjust, going from shorter D3 school to Maryland. I think that, just the tempo, the play, I think that, the pace of play, I think that's kind of one question mark there. And then Maryland was able to add Isaiah Wright, former Rutgers, Buffalo offensive lineman, started at left tackle, also has experience at center, but he'll get a chance to come in at that left tackle spot. And I think, if Maryland's kind of able to solidify both those tackle spots, I think the offensive line will feel a little bit better. Kyle Long, he showed some promise, I thought, last year. I thought he was arguably the better lineman compared to Emilio Moran, who I thought, should have been second string. And again, Kaltenberger, Ba, I think both those guys are able to kind of upgrade their positions. But, Wright, he just signed with the program during the spring. So he's now with the program, but he'll be going through fall camp, working with the offensive line. So the big question is, how are they all going to mesh and mold together? But like I mentioned earlier, Maryland brought in Damian Roblowski to team up with Brian Braswell to really bolster the position. And they know that it all starts in the trenches, and they're working hard to try and develop that. But I think that the offensive line might be as much of a question mark as the quarterback spot right now.
What would you say, kind of moving to the last spot really on the offense that we haven't talked about, tight end? I think one of the biggest losses for the Terps was losing Corey Dyches, right? Who was that tight end? You could kind of split him out into the slot, other parts of the formation. What does the tight end room look like, with the departure of Corey Dyches now?
Yeah, absolutely. Dyches, he was definitely reliable. He's going to be a big play guy over at Cal. Excited to see what he does. Been rooting for him. In terms of the current room, Dylan Wade is the guy that he really stepped up. Was a guy even in high school. I know that there was a time going into his senior year, or I believe during his senior year, where he wanted to play defensive end, and Maryland was very intent on just his skill set, his athleticism for his size. Was a perfect fit as a tight end in Mike Locksley's offense. He enrolled last summer, was able to kind of get his feet wet a little bit freshman year, recorded his first career touchdown, and then he really built off of it this spring too, where I think he could probably challenge, Preston for those, for those first team reps. Preston Howard, again, he's another guy, has tight end experience, but really played quarterback in high school. So once he got to college, it was really about learning the intricacies, the fundamentals of tight end. And you're really starting to see it, last year behind Corey Dyches, where he was able to really be an asset in the passing game. Work in progress as a blocking tight end, but I think right now, I think he's proven to be a dependable piece in the passing game. I think the tight end room, big question there is that blocking tight end, and like we talked about, the offensive line is a question mark. So when you're able to kind of find that blocking tight end, I think that kind of helps mitigate some of those concerns right there. So right now, I'm keeping tabs on second-year tight end AJ Szymanski to kind of fill that role. I think that's kind of where that tight end room, a couple underclassmen right now that they're kind of leaning on, but that's a room that they're very, very high on.
Maryland's evolution is fascinating in so many ways, right? They've put together back-to-back 8-win seasons, have definitely raised the floor from where it was now with Mike Locksley as head coach. And now the evolution of maybe this year's defense being the best defense in recent memory. That's kind of fascinating because you lose Tarheeb still in the secondary. You lose Bo Braid in the secondary, and you lose maybe their best defensive player in Jayshawn Barham, who's going to start at a great defense and a great program like the University of Michigan. What part of this defense coming back in 2024 really stands out to you as most impressive?
Yeah, I mean, it's still the front seven. I think, even, like you said, Jayshawn Barham, that's definitely a loss, but they returned Ruben Hippolyte. Caleb Wheatland's a guy that has a lot of experience, and Daniel Wingate, Mike Harris, both those guys in the middle. Both those guys were able to get a lot of playing time as freshmen, so really get a chance to step in their second year and fill in the gap. So, and then you have Keyshawn Flowers, who's a guy who really proved to be an impact piece in Spalding's defense. Anyone familiar with Spalding knows that they run Maryland's defense, so he'll be able to kind of settle in, acclimate himself to Maryland's style of play right now. And but again, the defensive line, they returned Jordan Phillips, they returned Quayshawn Fuller, they returned Tyze Johnson, Tommy Akinbasote, all of these guys. A lot of returning experience right there. And I think that's really where that confidence comes from. And then you look at the outside linebacker room, Donnell Brown, Kellen Wyatt, and they didn't even have Neo Avery, who was one of the state's best edge rushers when he was an underclassman, when he was a junior, battling back from injury and whatnot. So he's a guy that he's been able to work and get himself acclimated with Big Ten style of play through spring ball, and he's going to be a factor in that outside linebacker room. So there's just a lot of pieces, a little bit more depth along the defensive line that really gives Maryland confidence to arguably put their best front seven together since the early 2000s.
I look at Fuller and I look at Phillips on the defensive line, and you mentioned the front seven, but I take one step back at the linebacker room, and to me that seems to be the key of how this defense is really going to flow, because you look at Kellen Wyatt coming back, who led the team in sacks and tackles for loss last season. You mentioned Donnell Brown. Ruben Hippolyte was second on the team in tackles last season. How important is it to, one, having those guys stay healthy the entire year, and really their production to see this defense possibly reach the top potential that it has in 2024?
Yeah, I would say all of those guys really just as important. I mean, Ruben Hippolyte, he's just a stud. But beyond just the X's and O's, I mean, he's really the quarterback of the defense. He's that leader of the defense. Him and Dante Trader Jr., I really look at both those guys as kind of being those key veterans. Donnell Brown, he not too many people have that type of speed off the edge. And Kellen Wyatt, I mean, he just continued to prove efficient. The way he's playing now at Maryland is exactly how he was playing as an upperclassman when he was at Spalding. So I think all three of those guys, obviously Ruben being an inside guy, Donnell and Kellen being outside backers, all three of those guys are really, really integral to Maryland's rotation and really their success in 2024.
So we talked about the front seven. Now we're going to back up to the secondary, right? We talked about the receivers. The last handful of seasons, they've had some good players that have gone off to the league and at the college level have put up some good production. Defensive backfield, I think they've had a really good track record, especially the last couple of years. Now you look at Dante Trader as maybe that next guy. Do you see him being that next guy that can be an NFL draft pick from this Maryland secondary?
Yeah, he has the athleticism and really, I mean, the range to really showcase that. I think, him and Bo Braid, consistently were 1-2 in Maryland's defense last year. I think Dante Trader really has that high ceiling, and like you mentioned, Bo Braid, that's a big loss. He started really the last 2 years Before that, he played just about every game. So that's a lot of experience that you have to replace. But I think Dante Schrader is definitely. I would also put Ruben Hippolyte in that group of Jordan Phillips as well, of guys who I think could potentially go on to the NFL. But Dante Schrader is definitely the leader in that secondary right now.
I want to look at the rest of the secondary because there are some newcomers. One guy really stood out to me was transfer Jalen Husky. He's transferring in from Bowling Green, 43 tackles last year, broke up 6 passes, 4 interceptions for the Falcons over there in the Max. And I think he excites a lot of Maryland fans. What impact do you expect him to make right away, transferring from the group of 5 level up to the competition like the Big Ten?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was, even at Quince Orchard, he was very well known as a difference maker. I think this is a guy that a lot of people locally are really excited about, that he's coming back home now. But in terms of Jalen Husky, he's coming in, and I fully expect him to be that top corner for Maryland going up against the opposing team's top wide receiver week in, week out. He proved that he was capable of, matching up when he was at Bowling Green. And since he's come to Maryland, he's consistently been one of the top performers on defense right now. So I think just kind of with that experience, the quarterback room, behind him, there's a lot of guys with a little bit less experience. So I think Husky really, that experience that he brings into the program, there's a premium on that. But, beyond that, I think Perry Fisher, he's another guy where, he played wide receiver, quarterback, and a little bit of defensive back as well in high school. But when he came to College Park, he signed on as a wide receiver, quickly transitioned to corner, and similar to Preston Howard, where it's just a little bit newer of a position. He was learning the ins and outs, the technique of the position. Really had his breakout game in the spring game against Auburn, and I think he's going to be that guy next opposite of Husky to be that second cornerback. Then you have another guy like Lionel Whitaker, Braden Lee as well to kind of iron out the rotation. But I think many are expecting Husky to be that dominant piece that he showcased himself to be at Bowling Green.
When I look at this schedule, it's very intriguing to me for 2024, because if I'm a Maryland fan and I'm looking at this early season schedule, I'm getting excited. I'm looking at 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, 4-0. Could they get to 6-0 by the time they play USC? And USC's got to travel all the way across the country to the East Coast to take on that matchup. Maybe even a 7-0 start. Would you consider it a disappointment if they lose somewhere like 2 games or more in that first half of the schedule?
Yeah, I think it would be a little bit disappointing just because, UConn, Virginia, Villanova, obviously Maryland should be able to, go undefeated in non-conference play. I think Michigan State, it's a little bit of a wild card. You can't ever say what to expect out of a first-year head coach and stepping in with so many new pieces. So especially with that being in College Park, I think Maryland has a good chance there. Indiana, very similar, but, Indiana's they can be sometimes a tough place to play. Maryland, Indiana has had some very exciting games when Maryland first joined the Big Ten. So I think Maryland definitely, like you said, I think they do have that shot to really kind of build that momentum. I also say I think a lot of Maryland fans kind of recognize that in years past, Maryland got off to that strong start, and once November hits or mid-October hits, that's when the losses start to pile up, and kind of that narrative that Maryland has to win the big games. That's kind of where that wants to change. But like you said, chance to go 6-0 going into your homecoming game against USC, and like you said, I think. I personally think Maryland's going to beat USC for that homecoming game. That's that one game that I have for this season. So I think 7-0 is a realistic possibility. If they lose one, maybe Northwestern. Northwestern. Last year they played at Northwestern, and it was coming off the bye. It was awful weather. It was just a miserable, very forgettable game. So sometimes that stuff happens in the Big Ten. So if there's one loss in there, I think it would be, Maryland fans would say, 6-1, that's okay. 5-1, that's okay. 2, I think would definitely be disappointing, but I personally think Maryland has a very realistic chance to open up 7-0.
And this has been maybe a little bit of the norm. They get off to hot starts maybe the last couple of years, and they find more difficult games. I'm glad you mentioned that USC game, because I'm kind of feeling the same way a little bit. Because when you look at USC early in the schedule, they got to play LSU early in the schedule. They got to play Michigan early in the schedule. They could have a couple of losses at that point. Maryland riding momentum. We talk about this cross-country travel. You might have something there, and I'm kind of on the same boat possibly with you there. Now let's look to the second half of the schedule. You mentioned the big win that's needed for Mike Locksley. Now, no East Division, so you don't have to play Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State all in the same year. You avoid Michigan this year, and you avoid Ohio State this year. But you do have Oregon on the schedule, and we already mentioned USC. How important is it to get that big win in the second half of the schedule? I'm looking at that USC game at home. I'm looking at Iowa at the friendly confines over there in College Park as well. And then Penn State and Oregon are also in the back half. How important is it for this year for Mike Locksley to get that big win in the second half of the year?
Yeah, I think it would. I think that's really the big thing that would really move the needle. You know, just talking, especially in local recruiting, talking to local coaches, things like that. You know, a lot of people they recognize that Mike Locksley, the year-over-year progress is undeniable. The vibes, the feedback around the program is night and day different than it was, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. So that, I think, is all kind of been set in stone. But again, a lot of the elite guys that can go to the Blue Bloods, they recognize that the big games that they've been in attendance for, Maryland hasn't always been able to live up to those expectations. So full disclosure, I'm not sure how optimistic I am at Maryland at Oregon. I think I personally believe I know Ohio State reloaded, but I kind of view Oregon as that top team in the Big Ten, and we'll see how it looks in November, December. But Penn State, to close out the regular season, I think that'll be a really interesting game. I think every single Maryland fan will be appreciative to beat Iowa at home. So if Maryland's able to pull off that one, I think that would be a big win. But like you said, avoiding Michigan, avoiding Ohio State, I think that kind of eases concerns a little bit. But I think, granted, like we said, if Maryland's able to beat USC, I think some folks would be able to recognize that would be a marquee win. I think USC is kind of entering a down year in 2024. I'm not too high on them. So I think Maryland would be able to kind of could be potentially favored in that matchup. But if Maryland's able to pull off that big win, I think that's just the next domino that would be able to drop for Mike Locksley and the Terps to take that program and elevate it one more step.
Boy, I can't imagine beating USC. That would be that marquee victory. And if they stand at 7-0, I think a lot of people around the Big Ten and a lot of people around college football would view the Maryland Terrapins a lot differently. Ahmed Ghafir, always great to talk to you from inside the black and gold. I'm sure we'll see you down the road.
Absolutely. Appreciate you again having me on.
Thanks for watching Big Ten TED, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten TED to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.